Hello, everyone. Great to have you all here. My name is Rob Eddy. I'm the Technical Director for Resource Innovation Institute. And you're at the right place. You're at the Retrofits for Controlled Environment Agriculture webinar, sponsored by PG&E. I'm going to do some introductions later, but first we want to have some context remarks from PG&E. So I'd like to introduce Mary McDonald, who's the Tool Lending Library and Class Coordinator for the Workforce Education and Training Department of PG&E. Mary, could you tell us a little bit about the context of this workshop series?
Certainly, and welcome. As Rob said, my name is Mary Lucas McDonald. I'm really enjoying developing and expanding our agricultural energy classes, and RII has been a huge piece of this. So really thrilled to have today's class. They'll tell you more about the remainder of the series later on. This is a disclaimer by PG&E, and basically the gist of this is that the information in here is intended to provide general information about situations you may encounter, and it may not necessarily apply to specific situations that you encounter. Also, we don't endorse any products or manufacturers. Next slide, please. Now, most of you probably, hopefully you will later on let your voice be heard and ask a question, because we really do appreciate that interaction. And this is a release that says we can use your images or your voice in future promotional materials. Go ahead to the next slide, please. We always do like to include a safety message. First, about earthquake, of course, drop, cover, and hold. If we do experience an earthquake with all the winds, I hope we don't get an earthquake on top of that. Evacuation plan. Have an evacuation plan for you, your family, your coworkers. Know where you would evacuate to, and then convene together to be sure that everybody's safe. Know who to look for. Speaking of that power or the earthquake and the rains, I'm having a few power difficulties and my power keeps flickering, so I hope that I do not drop out of this. In terms of an emergency plan, you should also have a go bag, and that's a bag where you put everything you might need if you had to evacuate in a moment's notice. Be sure you include your medications and be sure you include your pets. I know I have my own go bag for my cat. Stretch, get up and move. Every 30 minutes is a good idea. You can still pay attention to class, get up, stretch your arms, and move those eyes around a bit, get a little bit of exercise in there. And then, yeah, hopefully we're very close to over with the CD or with the COVID issues, but do practice social distancing and wear a mask when it is appropriate. And if you'd like more information about emergency preparedness, there is our website for that. One more slide for me, I think. Also, as Rob mentioned, we're sponsoring this class, and we always like to improve our offerings. We like to know what we're doing right, what we could do better, how the training was received by you. So towards the end of the class, I'm going to put a survey link into the chat box. Please go to that link and fill the survey out. If you have any written comments, there's blanks for that, and those really help us too. Let us know if there's other topics. You'll hear about this, the series we're doing right now, but maybe there's other things you want to know about that are specifically related to either controlled environment, agriculture, or other topics. Please let us know. And then also RII will be sending you a follow-up email after this class. We'll also include the survey link in that. All right, I think that goes back to you, Rob.
Great, thank you, Mary. So I'll give you a quick introduction to myself and the speaker panel. We'll also talk about the agenda and what the focus of this is. First of all, Carmen, can you advance the slide? We're going to do our first poll. If you'd read that and answer that, we'd appreciate that. And we'll talk about the answer at the end of this section. So this is how we will do a little bit more interaction, learn who you are. Sometimes we'll even test if we've done a good job teaching you about the subject. So if you do these, we greatly appreciate it. It helps us out. I mean, I need to do mine right now. Okay. So the purpose of today's workshop is to encourage cultivators to participate in PG&E and California efficiency programs. Of course, we'll be conveying scientific insights and industry experience directly to you, and we're going to find the best ways to translate them. That's where we brought in our expert panelists, and we've spoken a lot about the best way to get some of these ideas across. And we're going to assist craft producers and their design and construction partners with what they need to do to stay competitive with the big guys. So it's not just the large companies we serve. We want to serve everyone, and you'll see that in this presentation from large to small. Next slide, please. Here's our agenda. We'll be speaking about just going over some concepts of retrofits and our Retrofits 101 that Carmen will present in a few minutes. Then we'll cover evaluating the site for your retrofit. There's a lot of stuff that you really need to take a close look at that you may not have thought of before, so we do want to cover that. Previous cannabis facility considerations. Sometimes that's great that it's a previous cannabis facility. Sometimes it's not. So we're going to cover that. We're talking about warehouses. I'll talk about greenhouses, and then we'll get back to some of these really cool state assistance programs that can help your bottom line. And then at the end, we'll do about an hour of this instruction. And then at the end, we'll have 30 minutes for all of you to ask questions, a question and answer period. So during the course of this seminar, the way you can hit the raise your hand button, and I'll be alerted to that by Carmen, and we'll answer your questions, or you can just type it into the chat, and we may answer it then. Chances are we might hold it to the end so we can really loosen things up and have our panel tell stories, answer questions, and have a real give and take. Next slide, please. So again, my name is Rob Eddy, Technical Director, Resource Innovation. My background is in research greenhouses and grow rooms. I spent 20 years at Purdue University as their plant growth facilities manager. Prior to that, I worked in corporate world at Dow AgriSciences, and then I was doing, after Purdue, consulting for vertical farms and cannabis growers and community colleges and hydroponics growers. So that's kind of a background who I am, and I love sustainability, and so that's why I love that I'm here today helping spread this word. Aaron, do you mind giving us a little bit of introduction?
Sure, thanks. My name is Aaron Fellabaum. I'm currently the product marketing manager at Fluence Bioengineering. Spent the last 7.5 or so years here. I started with the company back in late 2015, early 2016. I was heading up the sales department for a long time, as well as the lighting design department. And prior to Fluence and joining BML and horticulture initially, I spent about 10 years before that in the CEA, controlled environment, agriculture, and cannabis space, helping people here local in Austin cultivate better medicine, better food.
Thanks, Aaron. Joe?
Hi, I'm Joe Cavallero. I'm the CTO for Nimbus Cannabis. We're located in Sacramento, California. Before joining the team at Nimbus, I was consulting on everything from power retrofits to just, CEA all over California, focusing mostly on the Santa Cruz area, Bay Area. I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of what indoor grows can be in California. Long before that, I was a fabrication engineer. So I have a manufacturing background and try and bring those standard operating procedures I'm, so familiar with to this industry to help people grow. And, excited to talk about the great resources you can get through this institute.
Great. Thank you, Joe. And as you can hear from Joe and Aaron, we particularly chose people not only with great experience, but that broad experience. Because when you're doing retrofits, you have to understand more than just lighting, more than just HVAC. You have to have a real good feeling for all the different aspects of walking into a building and evaluating if it can be used effectively. Next slide, please. So after today's workshop, the learning can continue. That you can see, you can create an account from that link at the bottom of this slide. And by the way, we'll be sending this slide deck to you in an email, as Mary had mentioned, along with the survey that we're going to do, so you don't have to jot all this down. So you, on our virtual classroom, you can access recording of the live workshops, tip clips, downloadable resources, and access to those some really cool programs from PG&E in the state, particularly the tool lending library. Next slide, please. So you can also register for upcoming workshops, March 28th, irrigation water reuse, in April, managing peak loads and renewables, in May 2nd, case studies and efficiency, where we'll try to bring everything together that we've been doing in all these workshops, and with people who have actually made changes and have been able to have measurable improvements in the efficiencies of their facilities. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to look at the results of our first poll. It looks like we've got a broad range of grower sizes here, with the larger than 22,000 being the largest group at 38%. That's great to know. That kind of surprises me. I love it. Okay, next slide, please. Next, I'd like to introduce Carmen Azarati, the Engineering Operations Manager for RII, Resource Innovation Institute. And Carmen's going to give us some background on the California space. Carmen, you want to take it away?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Let me get this next poll launched. So we're going to be asking you what type of facility you're considering retrofitting or that you're mainly working on. So we can continue to, as we go, refine what we talk about to focus on the folks that are here. All right, so a little background on the California cannabis space. So the California cannabis space is mature. We've been growing cannabis in California for a while. There's a whole range of license types. I believe the large ones were recently released, so those really kind of big license types just opened up. There's 2 levels of mixed lighting types, so folks who are using supplemental lighting. It's also a $4 billion legal market and an $8 billion illicit market, so there's still that out there. We've got indoor, greenhouse, mixed light, and outdoor. And the CEFA does pretty regularly release information about the statistics of licenses if you're interested. So it's always pretty cool. But here we're talking about retrofits. Why are we talking about retrofits? Well, it's because California is a mature market. It's because money has gotten more expensive and you have cannabis facilities dying out. You have regulations coming in that are restricting the ability to build new facilities. So, you know, you have this kind of concentration of the market right now. So you have the ability to buy a previous cannabis facility. If we're talking about retrofits in New York, there's not a lot of previous cannabis facilities in New York. In California, there's a lot of people who tried and maybe weren't successful. So that's one of the things that we'll be talking about and why we're talking about it today. So the types of retrofits that we are kind of seeing in California is, again, former cannabis facilities, whether those are greenhouses or indoor production, whether they're multi-tier, whether they're warehouses, someone who was growing cannabis in that space, and now you're coming in to try to grow cannabis in that space. We have warehouses, so warehouses that were not used for growing cannabis, but might have been used for storage or distribution or manufacturing or who knows. So kind of those special considerations for large warehouses. And then large floriculture greenhouses. So specifically talking about chrysanthemums, roses, and poinsettias, and those kind of large floriculture greenhouses, and coming into a large floriculture greenhouse, adapting that over into a cannabis facility. Because again, you know, there's regions in California, like specifically Monterey County, that's no longer allowing new facilities to be built. You either have to use the footprint or you have to use the existing building. So that's going to create this level of creativity. So that's kind of why we're talking about retrofits in California and the context of retrofits in California. So now we're going to talk about facility types that folks are doing. So it looks like there's, again, a pretty good range. Existing indoor warehouse facility is coming out on top, but existing greenhouse and previous cannabis facility are still up there. So it's good to see that we're planning to address this whole range. And then I'm going to hand it over to Aaron, I believe, to talk about your site.
Before we let Aaron loose, I'll ask the next poll question. And let me stop for a moment and see, was there a hand raised? Josh, did you have a question out there? You can speak up if you'd like to now, or you can write it in the chat. Okay, we'll keep going on then. So our next section is on evaluating your site. Carmen, next slide, please. If you could fill out this poll of if you ever used a regional incentive program. So that'd be great for us to know. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron, who will do the first 2 slides of this section, and then we'll turn it over to Joe to wrap it up with the final slide. So Aaron, take it away.
Thanks, Rob. So for my 2 slides coming up here, I'm going to talk about current infrastructure and available incentives, kind of generally or high level as it relates to evaluating your site. And I think there might be some folks on from PG&E who can talk more in depth about specific utility incentives available within your area if you do live within the PG&E utility zone. So in California and elsewhere in North America, you've got 2 basic types of programs. You have prescriptive and custom. A prescriptive program is something where you get a static amount of money per light if you replace it with a more efficient light, in most cases LED. And then custom incentives are really based on the amount of energy you reduce from the grid. And that's measured in kilowatt hours saved annually. So in those situations, you essentially define your baseline. In the case of a retrofit, it could be existing technology, and then use that baseline to evaluate or estimate energy reductions by implementing new technology or retrofitting with new technology. Those are the 2 main types of programs that exist within North America. There's other programs out there that are state funded, like CMAP program in California as an example. And so based on where you're at locationally or geographically, you could see these programs change in the way they provide incentives based on what you're trying to accomplish within the context of a retrofit. As far as site selection and evaluating existing infrastructure, some things to be kind of cognizant or aware of are amounts and then availability. So whenever a utility company goes and offers an incentive, it's usually done on a yearly basis. Those years are sometimes calendar, occasionally they are fiscal. But what that means in terms of site selection and timing is that if you plan on retrofitting older technology out, there may be benefits to slow playing that over the course of 2 either calendar years or fiscal years in order to obtain as much rebate or incentive dollars as you can for the project. Which is a good way to reduce CapEx outlay if you're trying to slowly upgrade a facility from something that was underproducing or something that has infrastructure that is old and just needs to be replaced. That's a strategy that you can utilize and keep in mind as you assess different sites or facilities. Amounts can vary, and I think in the state of California, I did a quick check this morning. If you're on a custom program within the state of California, I saw on the low end, it's 5 cents a kilowatt hour saved, and up to, I think, 25 cents a kilowatt hour saved in some locations. So with that variance, you can see a quicker or a longer payback depending on what kind of incentive is available within your area. There is a good resource available out there for incentives. And it's called Incentivizer. It's a tool that's online. If anyone wants to know more about that and doesn't live in the California or does live in the California area, I'd be more than happy to link them to that after the presentation. So we can go to the next slide, Carmen. Thank you. Assessing existing infrastructure. My high-level takeaway here is just that you can't take enough data points. If you think you're not, if you think you've measured enough things, there's probably 2 more things within the facility that you haven't measured. And basically the importance here is just that you take all of these data points, you collect them, and then use that to run an economic analysis or assessment on the feasibility of a retrofit. Things that might not pop out at you, like the height of your lighting gantry off the floor, or the depreciation of your HPS lamp as it relates to the performance of your HVAC. These are all kind of dependent factors that once you add them all up, they paint a picture that ultimately will give you a good estimate of what your payback and ROI would be to perform the function of a conversion or a retrofit to new technology. So I've listed a few different bullets here that are important. By no means is this it. And I think that especially within HVAC, it can get very complex. And so my recommendation as it relates to assessing the current infrastructure is if you don't have that bench strength on your staff, so to speak, there are third-party companies that can do assessments and analysis for you on the front end. But also you could leverage equipment vendors or various partners within the space who offer the service for free. But the key point here is just the more data, the better. Catalog everything you can. Every inch and measurement that you could consider to be important or not important probably is. And so with that, I'll just let the next slide go.
Yeah, Joe, can you talk to us about building envelope?
Yeah, so those of you that have your own warehouse, hopefully you're really familiar with all the materials in it. But if you're coming into, you know, a grower's, whether it's cannabis grower or, you know, some other, say, microgreens, you don't really know. I mean, it's like Aaron was saying, you can't get too much data about your space. You really want to get every single material. And if you don't know if that material could harbor mold or, you know, residual pesticides or some other contamination, you should talk to someone that does know. That's why, you know, third parties exist. That's why you have the Resource Innovation Institute. You can go through and figure out all those things. So damage to your insulation, see this one all the time, or just old insulation. You know, a lot of these warehouses you're going to get are, you know, really old, and I hate to say it, but a lot of times you're going to want to rip out a lot of that drywall, see what your insulation is, get it all out of there. There's great products out there like Den's Glass. I mean, I see a lot of people just ripping out everything and then putting in, you know, refrigerator wall basically, which is like a styrofoam, which is going to last forever. And, you know, can be kind of a pain up front, but it can be worth it at the end. But if you don't have those options, you know, you have, you know, FRP, some fiberglass material. You got to think about also what time of year you're looking into these things. You know, temp and humidity extremes are going to really affect how that insulation, you know, it might not have anything right now. If you have a bad actor you're buying from, or, you know, a traditional grower is just trying to pawn this off on you, they might have done something to remediate real quick, but then the rainy season's going to come back, and they knew there was, you know, if you see some like new, you know, plywood up top on the service deck, you know, well, maybe they had some leakage from some areas. So just be aware of anywhere that any environmental concerns could be coming into that. You know, whether it's snow, if you're out of the state. I know we don't see that a lot in California, but, you know, we're seeing it right now where there's a lot of, you know, snow piling up on places. And if your structure is not doing well, I mean, that's going to get into your structural load consideration, especially if you're going to be putting in, you know, new equipment. You're putting 60 tons of AC on top of these rooms. You want to start from the get-go, making sure that you know exactly what you're looking for. Your roofing materials, you know, that's just as important. A lot of times it can be a high upfront cost, but a lot of times it's just worth it to, you know, go and it's time to re-roof that 25-year-old warehouse that never had anything, you know, it had like ceramics in it, you know, or it had some, you know, workspace for, you know, appliances or something that didn't really matter. There's fluctuations. Like it's going to definitely matter when you're growing inside of those seams and cracks. I mean, you can, if you find lots of like expando foam that you could find in like Home Depot or whatnot, you're going to see some red flags there. You know, the door seals and the airflow. I know we're going to talk about positive pressure later a little bit here. Aaron's going to get into that. Super important for you to prevent pests and, you know, intrusion from the environment, that you can know what you're getting yourself into and help you negotiate ideally, you know, better price or find the best price up front, you know, get those pain points out of the way. And make your CapEx realistic for you and your investors. Airflow, you know, I like, you know, you see air curtains and stuff. There's things you can do. You can add to your existing facility to kind of, you know, prevent as much as you can, but it's going to come back to getting a good HVAC engineer who understands what you're looking for. And then codes, research and consult. You know, a lot of times you'll read a code and you think it means one thing and it doesn't. Like you need to talk to an expert who knows exactly what that code means in your situation. And, you know, sometimes even the code enforcement doesn't, you know, they read it one way and then your contractor is like, that's not how I've read it. So just get the right team together. If you have a lot of experience, that's great, but don't hesitate to reach out and try and get third-party help. a lot of the folks that RII recommends are great for that. Yeah.
Thank you, Joe. And I would point out that as the workshop series moves forward, we'll be talking more and more about codes. So next, we're going to look at our results. It looks like most folks are not taking advantage of the regional incentive program, but they're interested. So you are in the right place. Thank you for filling out that poll. Next slide, please. We're doing pretty well on time, maybe a couple minutes, maybe 3 minutes behind, but we can make that up. Our next section is going to be on previous cannabis facility considerations. Next slide, please. We'll take another poll. So what is the biggest concern for retrofitting? HVAC, lighting, facility construction, sanitation. So another poll that you can do for us. And for this section, we're going to start off with Joe doing a couple slides and then switch it over to Aaron. So Joe, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, just to reiterate, like all 6 sides of the box, that means your floor and your ceiling and all your walls, like contamination can be hidden many places. And what season you're in is gonna, might be hidden in the summer. You might be seeing something that only happens during the rainy season. So make sure, like, if there's any doubt, I just say rip it out. That's a kind of I like how that sounds too. So I'm gonna add that one. I don't know if I've ever said that on purpose before. And then with your lighting inside, I know Aaron's is in detail on this, but if those warranties will transfer, if you come in and you see some great, lights from a well-known manufacturer, that's awesome. Gets into manufacturer support. You come into a spot and you notice that all the lights are only available on Amazon.com and they're all consumer grade. Might want to go back to that grower and be like, I'm not going to pay for these. These are going to be a liability to me. Like, you go sell those back on Amazon, as used units, and you recoup the money. Because, like Carmen was saying, there's a lot of people out there in distress. People have gotten themselves in over their heads. And it's not your job to get them out of it and use their bad mistakes. Like, find a manufacturer, you can trust. I'm not going to name any, but the big ones that have the infrastructure to support you are the ones you want to go with. There's a few out there that are great and they have great warranties, especially for LEDs. They make it really attractive. And then when you've been using these lights for a year, they're not going to disappear, because there's a lot of lights out there that you can buy that are, manufactured out of the country, really great price point. But then I've seen it happen to a few folks where the manufacturer goes under and they're left with all these lights where they have no support. And they have really specific power supplies they can only source from one country. And it just becomes a huge headache. Like, might be a little more upfront cost for the bigger manufacturers, but it's definitely well worth it. And then even if you do find some lights in there that are great warranty, they've only been used a few weeks, get in there and try and figure out with sensors, the proper PPFD sensor. If you're doing a full spectrum LED, that's going to be different than one of the magenta ones. You get the right sensor from the right company and get in there and test all those lights. It can seem like a lot up front, but if you're going to pay for it, you want to know what you're getting. And then HVAC, the age of the system's huge. Who designed it? Like, what data they have. A lot of the good HVAC systems out there have, they can log basically everything for the entirety of the last project. And if you go through that with either a third party or yourself, if you're into, analyzing the data, you can see if there's been some big problems, some huge humidity spikes would come to mind. If you see a project that just kept on having 95% humidity over and over again, maybe you ask who you're buying that system from, like, what's going on here? Like, I don't want that to happen in my grow, so obvious damage is obvious. Hidden damage is one of the worst things. I'll tell you all a horror story later, but it can get real bad with HVAC, because a lot of times you're not able to see what's behind those closed up, sealed, insulated HVAC ducts. So again, testing, they shouldn't be afraid of you opening up some of those ducts and looking inside and find the right third party that's going to come in and guarantee that HVAC is going to perform as your seller is telling you it is.
Great stuff, Joe. We got about 5 minutes for this section, so let's keep going.
Sure thing. DIY or contracting, a lot of folks I've worked with in the past love to do the DIY. Cannabis forever, we're building grows wherever we could. It's not that time anymore. It's time to build that, company, that dream company you wanted that's going to stand the test of time. So if you have specialized skill set, you're a general contractor, like, that's great. Come in, build it out, but you're still going to want to consult on what to use materials wise, especially if this is your first time growing. There's plenty of folks out there that know exactly what you're going to need and give you a few different options for your price points. And a lot of those folks are going to have that industry relationship. The cannabis industry is getting better and better about working together. It's no more of the like kind of old school or like every little grower's a kingdom. I think Resource Innovation Institute's a great example of what the industry can be, because a rising sea, lifts all boats, and like we're all in this together. So like get the info that's out there for you so that you're getting the right stuff up front, save you those headaches of just trying to go back and repair it later on. That's huge benefit of that licensed work. Supply chain, again, the big manufacturers out there, like they've got it pretty dialed, and you don't want to like have half your facility built out and then you can't get lights for the other half, and you're supposed to be operational for that other half of your facility. And like the same goes for your ACs or your dehumidifiers, your humidifiers, anything you need for all the parts of it. I would always recommend going with a manufacturer that has a long track record, because all these products exist for all the other closed environment agriculture industries. Product life cycle support, you're going to see a lot of competition amongst those bigger brands too, giving you really good warranties that are really easy for you to claim. And commissioning your stuff, getting it up and running, like that starts well before your plants ever come in. You're going to want to just run those rooms, load test, make sure you got your electrician in there so that what your loads are, what they're going to be in reality. So you don't fire it up and 3 days in, you've got power outages, you've got your HVAC failing. Experience with your other systems can, save you headaches and money. There's a lot of system companies out there that like to, pull them all together and create a complete package for you.
Thank you, Joe. Aaron, you want to take over and start talking about cultivation requirements?
Absolutely. So thanks, Joe. And actually, I was going to touch on a couple topics that you brought up. So unique cultivation requirements. Essentially, I see this as the other half to the current infrastructure slides that I was discussing earlier, where you take all of these data measurements and data points in order to help build out an understanding of what you want to do and how you're going to get there. This portion of that equation essentially combines what you want to do from a plant production perspective or an SOP perspective. Essentially, all of the factors that will go into your understanding as to whether a system will work or won't work based on what you currently do, implemented in the site that you've selected for the retrofit. Strains and planting densities can play a huge role based on what your HVAC tolerances are and your PPFD targets are. For instance, if you were to wattage match a retrofit and increase your transpiration and PPFD, your fertigation and irrigation system might not be able to keep up. And so it's a dependent factor to be aware of. But more than anything, it's just another data point to put into a catalog to help assess the system or conversion as a whole. In regards to what Joe was talking about earlier, the existing systems or specifically mechanical systems that are in place, if they can function with the sensible load that you're trying to put in via lights or other equipment, that's great. It means you don't have to touch the system. If your system is off the shelf, meaning you can have it serviced by someone locally for pennies on the dollar in comparison to an HVAC or control platform that you might have to have a specialist come out and do, also great. So finding ways to maximize what you can do with current infrastructure is always going to be the best move, so long as you can meet those cultivation requirements. So yeah, all this to say, more data points, the better. Understanding how those data points and all those environmental factors interact with one another is important. And you can't do enough due diligence on the subject of both current infrastructure assessment and cultivation requirements as they relate to one another. Next slide. For lighting specifically, and this is given my background, I put a slide together and I could probably talk this whole webinar through about lighting specifically. So I know that it's a bit of an eye chart, so I'll be somewhat high level and then encourage anyone after the workshop to reach out to me with any additional questions as it relates to assessing current lighting infrastructure and retrofits in particular. So within our typical existing infrastructure, legacy market or whatnot, you generally have about a 5x4 grid pattern of HPS, which can generally equate to about 700 to 800 micromoles per meter squared per second, depending on the lamp hours and depreciation of those lamps. I say all this because you want to take baselines. It's important to understand what you're using and what that is producing, so that you can then say, if I change my PPFD target, or if I lower my wattage, what is that going to do? In a case where you have 700 micromoles per meter squared per second from HPS, if you choose to lower that wattage and produce an operating expenditure savings, so to speak, you might be running at a deficit in terms of PPFD, as an example of a situation where you want to make sure you're getting both the most you can out of your CapEx and OpEx spend, while maximizing what infrastructure you have as it relates to your growing techniques and SOPs. So for lighting in particular, a big point of concern is uniformity when it comes to retrofits. Because the existing infrastructure is built out for HID primarily, fitting into the form, fit, and function of those HID systems is somewhat important. And if you can't, a lot of times you're going to spend more CapEx to make them work appropriately for your space. So on the lower portion of the screen here, I've taken a set of PAR readings out of Dialux, and I've just demonstrated how to do a quick assessment for uniformity. Basically, you take equal distant measurements between 4 most center point lights, and then divide your min by your max or your min over your average to get an idea of what you're currently working with. Now, whenever you implement new lighting technology, that lighting technology might have a different what's called spacing criteria, which could determine whether you need to use an optic as an example, or whether you need to raise your grid, lighting gantry or grid as an example. So these factors in baselining are not often investigated enough, I would say. I think that there's a lot of complexity here, and going back to what Joe was saying earlier, leveraging people that are industry experts is obviously something that I would recommend. But if you have the bench strength, like I said earlier, to do it yourself, and you're very interested and geek out on this stuff like I do, then it gets pretty deep, that rabbit hole. So yeah, just encourage everyone to do the due diligence as it relates to lighting uniformity and PPFD targets and wattage reductions and targets. Yeah, so moving on to controls. HID systems primarily have been working off of step level or continuous relay type signals that reduce the current at your bulb, essentially. That's very different than how LED systems and a lot of newer HVAC systems relay information back and forth, with 0 to 10 volt or pulse width modulation being a little more common with newer technology. Some of that follows commercial lighting. So the changeover in that regard can be a little bit complex. On the right, as an example, I included a relay system, a custom relay system that's basically touching the inside of a 0 to 10 volt standalone dimmer. Prime example of a very complex system and a pretty ingenious solution to integrating the two. But you do have options, right? You can go integrated where you have a Prevo, Argus, or a large control platform, but you can save some CapEx if the lighting manufacturer, HVAC manufacturer might be selling a control platform that integrates easily and can stand alone to the current infrastructure. As it relates to logging, benchmarking, those are upgrades to the system. It would be considered a retrofit. But my suggestion is just to, watch for irrigation frequency, transpiration rates, and logging and benchmarking. Having a system that can accomplish that is important, especially if you're augmenting PPFD and increasing it. And then alarming generally should be at the breaker level, because you don't want to put all your eggs into one basket and turn your lights off via dimming and whatnot, because that functionally is just not the best method. And that's it for controls. We can go to the next slide.
Thank you, Aaron and Joe. What I really enjoyed about your slides, both of you, was the actionable items that you gave for folks wanting to do retrofits, can really start measuring and thinking about. Here's the answer to our survey question. What is your biggest concern? HVAC seems to be the clear winner there. Next slide. We're going to talk about warehouse considerations. Now I'm going to turn it over to Joe after I do the next poll question. What is the next poll question? Can you go to the next slide, Carmen? Or maybe we don't have one for this section. I'm sorry. Joe, we got about 5 minutes. You have to kind of accelerate this one a little bit, but I know you can do it. Got some great info here. Take it away.
Sorry, I was muted there. Roof structural considerations. I mean, load, high load, high retrofit costs. I've seen folks go in and, have to make little rooms even littler because they just had to create like an airlock to have that sort of structural support for, a 12.5-ton AC for every single grow room in a relatively small facility already. Mm-hmm. I like seeing units that can go on the back of the building and go up and over the top. I think that's a really good solution a lot of times. And some folks won't even tell you that, up front, but that's always a great alternative placement. Penetrations can seem like a great, easy thing, but a lot of times with older roofing material, you're going to open up a can of worms, whether that's, old asbestos sort of stuff, or if we're just talking about really you're creating intrusion for water. So penetrations, when you're doing it, it can create a failure point. So if you're going to do it, make sure it's done right, and then just check it. You have a big storm, it's time to go up there and check all those penetrations, because every single one of them, you don't want to find out when one of your breaker boxes is, dripping and stuff starts shorting on you. You want to be ahead of the game with that sort of thing. So again, avoid penetrations, but a lot of times you can't, and you're going to want to go in and do it the right way, and then check on it. And if you can, find alternative places to do it. Like ease of serviceability, not much easier than going around the back of your building and like opening up the side of your HVAC unit, your AC and your heaters right there. There's a lot of different folks out there that do it. Depending on your size, I see a lot of folks going with mini splits these days, which can be a great, cheap alternative to getting a massive system. You're just not going to find the same sort of airflow control with those, but there's other ways to do that too. There's a bunch of different ways you can create the airflow you need in your canopy. Doesn't have to be a massive HVAC. And I see a lot of people are, they want to just put a, massive HVAC system on it, but then they might have some unused space in their room on their walls where mini splits could go, or even crazier. I've seen some folks repurpose, old units from freezers or refrigerators for commercial, and just put those coils directly inside the unit, inside your room, and change up the freon. I mean, again, you're getting into a place where you're going to want to bring a specialist who knows what they're doing before you go and buy, custom freon mixtures. But there's a lot you can do, and a lot of folks that can help you out with it. So just always think about where it's going to go. Exposure, if you have a controlled area to do it, it's good to be ahead of the game. Materials and permeability, reiterating that stuff, often overlooks that ceiling and the floors. So just you got to check on it. The floor, I mean, epoxy is kind of the be all end all. You get a good epoxy in after you've leveled your floor. I mean, I know those are high capex costs, but if you're trying to keep not be messy, you're trying to keep cleanliness as a goal, it always helps to just know what you're getting yourself into, because you get a bare concrete floor. There are a lot of different concretes from, ages past, especially, depending on what the facility was before. There can be things in there you didn't even know were in there. And then you start changing the humidity and you start changing the temperature wildly in these rooms. And all of a sudden your concrete is off-gassing some crazy oil that was trapped in it by, the chromium manufacturer that was there before you when you're testing for heavy metals or something. So there's all sorts of things that can go wrong. And I like to recommend, sealing it up, get it under, a good, few millimeters of epoxy from a pro, and then it's, easy to clean. And cleanliness will always make your investors and your employees happy. Aspergillus and toxic contaminants, it's a bad word, but if you're in an old warehouse and there's wood, there could very well, and there's been moisture in that wood, like aspergillus is just, it's in the air we breathe. It's one of those sorts of things, you can't escape it. And once it's there, you're looking at, painful remediation. And if it stays there, it starts, weeping through the walls, getting through. I've seen it get through things it's not some, that the manufacturer of the drywall is like, oh, it can't get through this. I'm like, life finds a way a lot of times. So make sure that you're getting surface testing done on anything that looks questionable, and getting site records. If you're going into a grow that was, operational before, they're going to have, certificates of analysis from the state. And if they were testing positive for banned, molds or biological contamination, that's probably come from their building. So like you can use that as to help you with the price, to help you then get in, find it, remediate that area, rip out that area. Cleaning up and tearing out, a lot of times you just have to tear it out. It can be really hard to clean that stuff up. You don't want it rearing its ugly head when you're operational. So getting it out of there, big band-aid to rip off, but I always recommend to do that. Cleaning and sanitizer compatibility, FRP, refrigerator walls are kind of the best, really easy to clean. And drywall, like a good dense glass or equivalent that's like, properly rated, can handle a lot of moisture. Not that you want a lot of moisture, but things go wrong, systems break. Odor mitigation and neighborhood citizenship. This one gets overlooked, but what makes our industry get treated so poorly by a lot of local municipalities is we're stinky. So you're going to want to go in and do that odor mitigation right first time. I think the king is, carbon. A lot of times you get the right carbon filters in, and you can get sustainable carbon that comes from, cocoa husk, which is pretty sustainable. The chemical neutralizers, I'm not a huge fan of. I know there's a few companies that do that one. Biofiltration, I feel like is the future for this sort of thing, but I haven't really seen any products that are, going to give you the same price point and sustainability argument that carbon does. But keep your eye out for good biofiltration. I mean, VOCs, they're going to permeate your staff. They're going to permeate everything that goes into the facility. You don't really want those getting out into the world around you. And like, honestly, there's still a lot of question marks about long-term exposure to the cannabis VOCs for these closed environment grows. So if you have, I like to always recommend that folks make their front of house filtered as well on its own filtration, so that the grows, the grows are gonna you're never really gonna escape those VOCs, but you don't need to let them permeate your whole facility, so that like even walking into your facility makes someone, go home smelling like a pound, which is not ideal. Waste storage and disposal, you're going to have your unique needs for every different municipality you're operating in, but make sure to get those deals done early and like double and triple check. I know some places will tell you have to put all your stuff through a chipper and cover it with food dye before you get rid of some leaves. That's generally not the case. If you just talk it out with them, a lot of these more onerous seeming regulations can become much easier, and disposal can just be a matter of having a green waste dumpster. Noise, air compressors, generators, all that, just make sure you've thought about it. And if you can, get those acoustic barriers in place so your neighbors don't hate you.
Great finish there. Yeah, so your neighbors don't hate you. So yeah, you need to be good. I like the mixing the technical with also you're part of the community when you're a cultivator.
Oh yeah.
Next 5 minutes is going to be about greenhouse considerations. Let's do a pop quiz. Now, we've not talked about this yet. Some of you may know it already, know the answer, so you can answer now, or you can wait and keep it up on the screen until I talk a little bit more about it. So this is what is positive pressure. So first of all, greenhouses, retrofitting greenhouse is pretty tricky. You'll probably have to upgrade utilities. That's the bottom line, because flowers and vegetables, the profit margin is so slim, those kind of greenhouse growers just couldn't invest in dehumidifiers and lighting, right? So, and I point out the greenhouse dehumidification, because of that low profit margin, this is something that's kind of brand new, that is only really come about because of the cannabis industry and the need for dehumidification. So again, you're going to have to most likely upgrade your electrical maybe your water, but maybe not. And the good news is this is an opportunity for on-site renewable energy. So you start talking to your utility about those options. Next slide. Okay, here's the other thing about greenhouses. If you're thinking about buying a greenhouse that we use for flowers or vegetables, that greenhouse was built with something in mind, and that was that you're going to use pesticides every week, maybe twice a week. They just weren't designed to keep out bugs. It was like, oh, we're going to spray, because that was just the reality. 10 years ago, if you asked growers, they would all say, oh, you're going to have to spray pesticides. There's just no alternative around it. And so no alternative. So that's why the builders, didn't try to improve upon that in order to keep the prices down. So greenhouses don't tend to have a very good seal to keep insects from penetrating. They're under negative pressure. A negative pressure is like suction. So it means you're blowing more air out than you're bringing in. That creates this negative pressure, this suction. And of course, that means, guess what you're sucking in? Spores, bugs, right? Another thing is gravel and dirt floors. It's cheap, but it's a bad idea because insects lay their eggs or they pupate down there and they just hop back up on your crop. So let me put it this way. Cement floors are the best pesticide you can have, right? Vents in these older greenhouses, they're often completely unscreened and open. The openings through an evaporative pad that you might use to cool your greenhouse are it could be a ½ inch wide. Any insect can get through that. In order to put a screen up that insects that'll keep insects out, but keep your airflow high enough, you have to kind of build a box around your vent. You just can't put screens up like you would on a window opening. And even if everything is perfect, those vents and such, like you see here on this picture on the right, when this vent closed, this is one that I managed, when it closed, it still wasn't sealed very well. You could see an inch or an inch and a half gap in one side of it because it just wasn't designed to be perfect. Layout. A lot of greenhouses, it seems goofy, but you have to walk through one greenhouse to get to the next one. Like there's no corridor. So if there's bugs in one and you and your staff are traipsing through, you're going to be dragging insects along with you. Also, these older greenhouses were designed that these standard greenhouses that they'd be emptied out maybe after spring, and they'd have a chance to clean up then, which is not going to be the case if you're doing perpetual harvest. Next slide, please. So here's how you would, if you're going to retrofit the insect screen, like I said, you have to build a box around it so you can get more surface area because the pores of those screens are so small that you've got to increase the surface area of the screen to get enough air into the greenhouse when the fans come on. Next slide, please. Talking about glazing materials. Glazing is the cover for your roof and sidewalls. Here on the upper chart, you can see the light transmittance. So glass lets 90% lights in, all the way down, all the way down to polyethylene, double layer, which lets in 80%. Doesn't seem that big of a deal, but the general rule of thumb, which has been proven scientifically, is that every 1% of light gives you 1% more yield. So that is, you are paying a price if you don't use glass. There's other things like acrylic as well. But one thing I want to point out, acrylic and polyethylene are, if you look over in the right column, are highly flammable. And this is not to be ignored. You may not think greenhouses catch on fire, but they do. And I've seen them. And it's not just mom and pop greenhouse out in the county. It's big ag chem firms have lost $1 million greenhouses because they built them with flammable materials, right? On the bottom is a point about the U factor, the insulation value of different types of glazing. And I just want to point out that you have to, with the new California Title 24, that U factor needs to be 0.7 or below. So basically, you can't really use single layer glass anymore. You can't use single layer polyethylene anymore, although I would never use that anyway. But things you can think about is, if it's an old greenhouse with single layer glass, you may be able to put a layer of polyethylene film over the top of that and inflate it. That's something that flower growers and vegetable growers have been doing for a long time. And that would bring the total U factor down to acceptable levels. Also thermal curtains. We'll talk about that in a minute. Next slide. So diffuse light improves yield of plants by getting more photons, the light photons, to the lower part of the foliage, and you increase yield by 8 to 9%. How do you get diffused light? You can buy special glass. It's diffused light glass. You can use shade curtains that are actually light diffusing shade curtains. You can tell when you see them because they tend to be white instead of silver. Or just polyethylene film or polycarbonate panels do a pretty good job of diffusing light. Next slide. Polyethylene film with infrared inhibition helps keep the heat out of your greenhouse, because the electromagnetic spectrum coming from the sun striking the planet, all the way from UV to X-rays, then the light, the sliver of visible light that we use to see with and plants use to photosynthesize. But then way over here on the other end is heat, infrared. And so these polyfilms are designed to keep the heat out while letting the light in. A little extra money, but worth it, because you can see a 29% savings on your cost, on your energy costs. Next slide. Same thing with thermal curtains, 26% saving using a thermal curtain. These are the same thing as a shade curtain. Sometimes they are the same curtain. If it has a closed weave, it can both shade your crop to cool the air and cool the leaf temperature of your crop, and you can also close it at night to keep from losing so much heat through radiation. So it can be both in one. Great idea to talk to curtain manufacturers as you're retrofitting a greenhouse. Next slide. So the answer to our pop quiz is the first one, which says air supplies exceeding exhaust is like inflating a room, and that prevents contaminants from being blown in or floating into your greenhouse. Next slide. Okay, next I'm going to turn it over to Patsy Duggar. I hope I said your name right, Patsy. I forgot to ask you during the tech check, so correct me if I'm wrong. And she's the Director of Business Development for the Association of Energy Service Professionals. Thank you, Patsy. Go ahead and explain.
Patsy, I think I have one slide before you here.
Great.
Oh, I apologize. Go ahead, Mary. Then we'll go Pat.
That's fine. And this is just a very, very general slide from PG&E, but in many cases for your retrofits, you're going to need to get either new power service or an upgrade. And this is just a general guide on how to get started. You can go to the website there, yourprojectspge.com. With your design, that's got to be in accordance with the PG&E Green Book, and there's a link to where you find the Green Book. You can call customer service to determine the best billing rate, and if you have any questions, you can contact the Building and Renovation Service Center. And I know that PG&E has a well-deserved bad rap now for being extremely long on these requests. And I will tell you that there are discussions happening at senior level on how to make these service upgrades and installations happen faster. But in the meantime, when you do go there, I encourage you, once you do know what your power and energy requirements are, if you know if you're going to need a meter upgrade or anything, go and submit your project early, get someone assigned to your project and someone who you can stay in touch with, so maybe they can help you with ways to get around any of the delays. And hopefully in the near future, our process will be improved to make it easier for you. So that's that.
Thank you, Mary. Patsy?
Thanks, Rob. So yeah, I'm Patsy Duggar. I'm with, actually, it's Alternative Energy Systems Consulting, very close to AESP, but we're AESC. Yeah, and we are the lead implementer for PG&E's Market Access Program. And so I'm going to take about 5 minutes to explain how, if you're an existing facility with 12 months of baseline usage, you can participate in the Market Access Program to fund retrofits to reduce your load. So what is the Market Access Program? MAP is an emergency energy efficiency program. It was authorized by the CPUC to address some serious grid capacity issues that we have in California, particularly in the summer during the 4 to 7 p.m. and 7 to 9 p.m. evening periods. This is when solar generation, you can kind of see tapers off. And when that tapers off, expensive and dirty peaker plants need to come on. And so this program basically pays for demand side reductions to avoid costs of generation, transmission, distribution. So it pays for energy reductions year round for every hour of the year. But for those hours between summer 4 to 7 and 7 to 9, there are some major bonus incentives available. So this is what it's targeting. It's a pay for performance program. So it kind of fits into that custom category, but it's different. It's delivered by aggregators or project developers. Project developers receive the program incentives in this case, and they receive them in 4 quarters in the year following a project installation based on the actual hourly measured energy reductions. So we perform the M&V for the program, and we'll look at the 12 months of baseline energy consumption, and we'll look at the 12 months after a project is installed, and we'll look at every hour. And every hour energy savings is worth a different amount in 3 different buckets. So aggregators have wide latitude about how they can leverage the incentives in the program to structure advantageous project pricing for customers. So for example, they can lower project pricing, they can offer financing, they can share incentives with customers. They have wide latitude. But so, encourage customers to shop around if you've got options. 3 main advantages of the market access program is that there's very high incentives. I'll show you a couple examples. There's expedited project approval and incentive reservation. ASC typically reviews, approves, and reserves incentives within a week of receiving a complete application. And there's broad measure eligibility. So, anything that can reduce load, it basically is eligible. That can be retrofit projects, that could be operational changes, that could be to code and above code measures. Load shifting is okay as long as it's paired with an energy efficiency measure. And horticultural lighting retrofits are eligible. The program targets 10% savings. Because we're measuring at the meter, we want to make sure that the savings show up in the noise. But we can look at lower energy savings projects, with certain considerations. So let's see, funding and timeline. The installation deadline, you need to have your projects installed and operational. Previous slide, yeah. Let's see, back please. There you go. Project installation deadline, you need to be installed and operational by March 31st, 2024. And funding is reserved on a first come, first served basis. Funding with the first allocation of monies that went to the utilities, at least PG&E's funding is getting to a place where it's almost expired. However, there was more funding allocated by the CPUC, and it is very likely that additional funding will be flowing to PG&E for this program. So stay tuned for that. It's in the works right now. So stay tuned on that, but most likely additional funding will be available. Next slide, please. Who's eligible? Commercial sites are eligible. Light industrial sites, including CEA, is eligible. You need to have 12 months baseline data. There needs to be model fit in terms of the way that your site uses energy. And that means that the energy use needs to be predictable and meet certain statistical requirements of the program. I can't really get into it here now, but I can tell you that it's easy for you to verify if your site meets those requirements. And I'll tell you how. Furthermore, if the site cannot have participated in an energy efficiency program in the year prior to the project installation, and you can't do a project in the year after that project is installed, because we need to have a clean baseline and clean performance period for measurement. Importantly, if you want to find out if your site is eligible or multiple sites are eligible, you can contact Tyra Adams at ASC, and you can provide 2 pieces of information still on the previous slide. previous slide to this. Okay, there's the service agreement ID number, and there's the meter ID number from your blue PG&E bill. So give those to Tyra. She can tell you if you're eligible. Next slide, please. Okay, these are 5 aggregators that were enrolled as of about 2 weeks ago. If you would like an updated list, reach out to Tyra. Additional aggregators may have joined since this slide was created. Furthermore, if you're an aggregator, or if you could be an aggregator and you're on the call now, feel free to reach out to enroll. If you're a customer, if you have a preferred vendor that you'd like to work with, they are welcome to enroll as an aggregator with us, and we can onboard them. This is not a closed list. That's the market access program aspect of it. So the process is you verify site eligibility, select your aggregator, they'll scope your project, estimate incentives, and propose a project pricing structure that meets your needs. A customer will need to sign that map application provided by your aggregator. They'll receive approval from us to install project installation. Then we'll do 1 year of M&V, and in 4 quarters, they'll receive their incentives based on actual measured impacts. Next slide. Here's a project example where there were 476 high pressure sodium converted to LED fixtures in a flower room in this first column here under flower room. And then 92 ceramic metal halide fixtures were converted to LED fixtures in a veg room. And the hours of operation remained the same. There were additional HVAC savings that were created from decreased heating load in the facility. The kilowatt hour savings are estimated to be a little over 1 million kilowatt hours. The annual cost savings to the customer, about $223,000, and the estimated incentives that would go to the aggregator, about $800,000. So if you do quick math, you might find that this is significantly higher than typical incentives through programs. And you're right, it is. That's about, in the range of $1,200 to $1,400 a fixture for these lighting retrofits. There's another example I didn't put on this deck, but I'll just share it because I think these, in addition to lighting, you can look, there was a humidification project where there were 56 240 volt steam humidifiers replaced with a single pump for misting and dehumidification. Those savings were $430,000. KWH was 430. Customer bill savings $95,000, and the aggregator incentive estimate about $231,000. So lots of money available to save peak energy. Finally, last slide. Wanted to share that PG&E's program that we're supporting is not the only one. Southern California Edison has a summer reliability program. AESC is supporting aggregator enrollment for that. So feel free to reach out to us if you're interested in that program. Also, San Diego Gas and Electric has a program, and Marin Clean Energy within PG&E's territory has their own flex market program that operates the same way. So with that, I'll turn it over to you. I hope I didn't run too far over. Thank you.
No, that's great, Patsy. What a fantastic program. Thank you.
All right. And we do have also TRC Companies, who is our third-party implementer for our agricultural program. And this is a slide about how to contact them. They do have incentives for lighting and controls, as well as for heat curtains and IR film, for boiler and pipe insulation. Oh, if you could go back real quickly. And for irrigation upgrades and more. But these, I will tell you, the grow lighting and controls, and I believe the irrigation upgrades tend to be custom, and those can take you a little bit longer, require a little more information to qualify for. But the greenhouse heat curtains and the insulations, those are deemed. So basically, it's a process of submitting receipts and getting payment back. You should always contact the TRC companies at one of these emails or phone numbers to get the process started, so you know that you're doing it right. Next one, next slide. So here's some examples of deemed rebates for the polyethylene with IR films and the like, as well as some of the thermal curtains and other issues. We've got energy measurement tool lending libraries. We have one that I run at PG&E. SCE also has one. We do loan throughout the state. You don't have to be our customer to borrow. There's a couple things if you want to do that. Your lighting uniformity study, take a stab at that yourself. We've got PAR meters. You can go do that. We've got flow meters if you want to look at your water. If you want to look at your panel, determine how much capacity you have left on your panel or how much each circuit is being loaded. You can do that with our power loggers. We also have tools for monitoring air quality, humidity, and temperature, which is key for your greenhouses. And then I'm going to turn this back over to Rob to talk about the statewide programs.
Carmen, do you know about these programs more than I, to be frank?
I think I just know the basics of these programs. So these are both statewide programs that are available to anyone in California. The first one is the Energy Design Assistance Program. So that can help folks who are doing comprehensive whole building energy analysis and be generally a resource for that. So consider checking those out, because if you're anywhere in California, you qualify not just in PG&E's territory or specific utilities, as well as there are cannabis specific tax incentives that you can take advantage of. So they're at the bottom, and both of these will be available in this slide deck as links. But if you're doing cannabis in California, you should check out if you can take advantage of these.
Dang, you did know about more than I did. Well done. Excellent.
And let me just add one little thing. Also for the lighting, that does tend to be custom under the ASAP program. That's Agricultural Energy Savings Action Plan. And I would say if you're looking at a lighting project right now, your MAP, the Market Access Program, is your best bet. It'll be faster and higher returns probably. Get it while it lasts.
How I wish these programs are here in the Midwest where I live. These are just wonderful programs. So I encourage all of you out there to take advantage of these, and you've got the contact numbers. Actionable takeaways from today's program: consider splitting the scope of the work into two to take better advantage of some of these incentives. Larger root media volume is buffer against crop stress. Evaluate warehouse or structural loads, penetrations, permeable surfaces. I think we heard some, and we'll probably hear some more nightmare stories from Joe in particular. Consider the option of removing equipment from previous cultivations facilities because it's just not worth it sometimes. So take a close look at that. Seal and screen openings in existing greenhouses, and keep in mind that greenhouse electric supply will most likely need to be upgraded. We're going to move to the question and answer period now. This has been so much fun. I'm going to open up with one question that I want to ask. In the meantime, for those of you out there, you can type in questions into the chat, or you can raise your hand and we'll call on you. And we've got a lot of questions to ask our panelists as well, but we mostly want to hear from you out there. So please don't be shy. Well, one question I have, I don't know, maybe I guess I'll ask this to Aaron or Joe, if either one of you know this. This is a trick one. Do any of the growers out there that you're aware of measure their water usage? And if they are, how are they doing it? Do they have just 1 meter? I'm just kind of curious about that. Do either of you have any information on that?
I think I'll let Joe take it unless.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've definitely seen a few grows, and our grow here at Nimbus, we track all of our water usage. It's generally just a simple flow meter. We actually have a reclamant tank and a skid dedicated to reclaiming water, because we're a little ahead of the curve for trying to regain all that. Now it's raining like crazy, not quite drought as much as it used to be in California, but water usage is huge. So some of us do. I don't think it's a huge priority for a lot of growers. Especially it gets way more difficult when you're not doing closed environment, like measuring water usage in greenhouse and outdoor can be, it can be a high ticket depending on like how many reservoirs you have, what your water source is. But when you're doing closed environment, it's really just a matter of every line gets a flow meter. And if you have like a good system to track that, there's a lot of folks out there that will offer you that.
Great. Thank you, Joe. I guess I should also remind the audience that part of the tool lending library that Mary's spoken about, I think the portable water flow devices, measurement devices are available. Tell me, maybe go back to Aaron on this one. Aaron, I presume you know a lot about California's cannabis market, although you don't live there. What do you think is unique about that market right now?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, it does stand apart from most states just because of the legacy growers that have been in the space for so long. Am I muted?
No, you're good.
Okay, good. And as such, there's just a long history of growing within the state, and a lot of really great growers have moved to California whenever the Medical Act started. Or are coming out of California just because of their history and in that space. So in that sense, I would say there's just a lot more intimate knowledge on both genetics and cultivation in comparison to other states in particular. It's kind of similar in states like Oregon and whatnot, where they've just had a long-standing history of cultivation, clandestine or otherwise, I suppose. But that history lends itself to a lot of really great phenotypes and genetics within that space, but then also just a lot of knowledge that it gets transferred from one generation of growers to the next. So in that sense, I would just say that level of knowledge is not the same everywhere. It's not equal across the North America or United States, and a lot of the people that are operating in other states or new states that are coming online are actually from California.
Totally agree that as I've been on teams in other states, you want to bring in someone from California. Quite frankly, the knowledge is there. Joe, do you have anything to add before we go on to our other questions?
Well, yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Aaron's assessment of my state. I grew up here. I see a lot of folks that are multi-generational cannabis farmers. Some of my favorite professionals, they're the first one to go to college, and then they get a PhD and, study powdery mildew or something that was like bothering all the generations of farmers before them. So you have it really just pervasive through our entire state, obviously the Emerald Triangle, but pretty much anywhere in California, a lot of the communities have been doing it. And right now it's very unique because you have this opportunity where the market has basically crashed in the last year. Prices are under half of what they were year over year for all legal growers. The traditional market is still king. It's a huge percentage here. So the right operators can come in and find a distressed property to start off if they're a legacy grower and they didn't want to get in the original because it was just such high upfront costs. You're talking, you see prices being, pennies on the dollar for some places now. So if you're traditional and you're trying to get into the legal market, there's a great opportunity in the next year here as, someone who just got the job because they can grow cannabis. If you're growing really high quality cannabis in the traditional market, it's a great opportunity to take advantage of your California heritage and take your rightful place as our we're kind of the leader of at least branding for cannabis.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Carmen, is anyone with their hands up that I should be aware of to ask a question?
Mary's got her hand up.
Mary, do you have a question for the panelists?
I do have a question. I also wanted to verbally answer some of the questions that are in the Q&A box. There's questions about load shifting and about on-site power generation, and want to remind people that not this next class, but the one after that, what date is our load shifting and renewables class? Maybe you all can chime in on the date. I'm not remembering offhand, but anyway, we've got that coming up in 2 classes. So please do come and learn more about that. But then my other question, April 18th. Good, thank you. And then my question for the panelists is, it's such a science designing the mechanical and building systems for a grow operation. partly or mostly because the different systems can interact so much with each other, like the heat from the lights affecting the HVAC load. And what kind of, and then the other issue is that then that has to be dialed into the specific cultivation requirements for the crop. So what kind of a professional would you recommend someone look into to helping understand that interaction between the systems and what the load requirements are?
Well, I'll start and then I'll let Joe go if that's okay. As far as resources that are out there, a lot of the people that are working, especially within the mechanical space, are the vendors. and a big reason that is the case is because they're what predates the cultivation side of the mechanical engineering space is really just server rooms and pools. And so is this kind of niche group of mechanical engineers that really had the wherewithal to start to look at how much latent load needs to be pulled out of a grow room. But because of that nicheness, I guess, a lot of the people that are in the space are vendors or manufacturers of the equipment. There's a few good ones, and obviously we don't need to name specific names, but evaluating those vendors and then using them as trusted advisors, both in HVAC and lighting, I think is right now the best resource for most individuals to gain knowledge on those subjects. And then Joe, if you want to add to that, I'm sure you can.
Yeah, I mean, I see it a lot. Folks will just go to, their John Everyman HVAC engineer who's done office buildings and, elementary schools, and, just assume that they can do closed environment agriculture. And that's generally not the case. Like I've literally heard an HVAC engineer once tell me, I just treat every plant as like a kid in an elementary school. I'm like, that is not, like, kids do not transpire like 80% of their water weight like every day. They're not water bags like that. It's just like you get some weird misconceptions, and then if that person builds out your whole system, then you fire it up, you'll have the wrong tooling. So he's right. The vendors will forward you to folks they've worked with before in your area generally that know exactly like what they need to keep you happy and keep your plants happy.
Great answers. And I would say as a former greenhouse manager for retail and for wholesale and then research, I was learning the most from tech reps, salespersons, from vendors. Don't be afraid to ask them questions. Don't feel like if you're new at this game, don't feel like they're going to try to sell you stuff all the time. What the good sales reps, and I know Aaron was this way for me, they'll be a resource for you, and they'll realize that eventually that'll probably lead to a sale. So my advice would be, don't be shy. Of course, show respect. These folks are very, very busy. They're not gonna. You want to save questions for them that you just can't get from anyone else. Okay, and respect their time. Particularly, keep in mind that if you're outside of California, every time a new state legalizes, when that deadline for the application for cannabis license comes due, all these vendors have a stack of quotes on their desk that everyone wants. And so you need to be, I'm just giving you advice on how to work with them. Just be respectful, and but don't be shy, and again, make their questions very succinct. Okay, I'm going to ask another question from my list, and Carmen, you can interrupt me if someone raises their hand. Joe, how about this one? Unforeseen costs that can break what looks like a deal that's too good to be true.
The horror story. Yeah,
please.
So I had experience with a client of mine in the Bay Area who had gone and found a warehouse that was, quote unquote turnkey. It had been used for a while as a traditional grow. So he couldn't find any problems with it. There was no mold. There was no, the walls were all done in FRP. The HVAC was, seemed pretty good. It was all working. The plants, they showed him pictures of all the plants, and they gave him some samples of the cannabis they'd been producing. And he was really happy about it. They went and they came to me after they got up and running, because when they got up and running after their first harvest, and they were a legal operator, they tested positive for a banned pesticide. I believe it was bifenthrin, which is, pretty common if you're doing ornamental plants, but it is for ornamental plant use only. It is not for using in a cannabis facility. And they were like, how did we get this? We've never sprayed this ever. And it was right around the time that California had switched from parts per million to parts per billion, but they didn't have any historical data anyways, because it was traditional grow. And so I go and I, ask them if they can, have a heart-to-heart with the folks and see if they'd ever sprayed anything they didn't disclose. And, sure enough, they did eventually. Oh, well, that's for spider mites. I was told by the grow store I could use that, and we were good. And like, maybe they were before, it was parts per billion, and it wasn't showing up in parts per million because they use a little bit or whatever they did. But what had ended up happening is that it contaminated the interior of all of their HVAC with bifenthrin. So when they ran that HVAC on their new clean room, that room was contaminated with bifenthrin. And I asked my good friend who's a PhD chemist, like, so what's this soluble in? Are we just looking at, do we like use alcohol or something to like just clean it out? And he's like, acetone. And so when someone tells you need to like basically douse all your HVAC in acetone, it's not good. So they had to end up ripping out all that HVAC and replacing it because it was too much of it was impossible. Basically, it was so contaminated. And we're talking about like parts per billion. Like, I'm sure, the danger is like, dubious here or there, but still, that was probably one of the worst I've ever seen, because the deal was in the end too good to be true.
Aaron, I'll let you either answer an unforeseen problem like Joe just did, or if you want to talk about secondhand equipment and if there's anything anyone can do with that.
Oh yeah. So, well, secondhand equipment, that's it is an interesting topic. So a lot of times, as Joe mentioned earlier, the warranties won't transfer whenever ownership changes hands or if you resell a product. In Canada, a couple of years ago, there was a couple large organizations that went out of business. And it was the first time that I had experienced any large scale sell-off of LED technology. And it ended up going to auction, commercial industrial auction sites. So far as where I've seen those kind of systems go and then be sold, which is interesting. It's a good thing in the way that that's out there, right? If you're looking for very cheap LEDs or something that will replace HPS and you're not really concerned with warranty, then it's a great avenue to make a large scale commercial purchase of LED or even probably HPS lights. I know those are up on police auctions, if nothing else. Anyway, all that to say, as a grower or a business owner, if you're looking to implement used technology, there's a huge risk assessment in determining what is or isn't worth the lower cost. And I would say generally, warranty should probably trump most anything technology related. It's just a de-risk factor that even if you were to save, hundreds of thousands of dollars on your lighting system, the equipment, you don't know what kind of hours of operation, dust accumulation or depreciation has occurred within those lamps or systems. But also, whatever cost savings that you might receive off of an auction or buying used equipment might not be worth the risk factor associated with implementing technology out of warranty.
Great, thank you, Aaron. Carmen, can you advance? Thank you. So, we welcome your feedback. You're going to have a chance to fill out a survey on how you thought this webinar went. So we would really appreciate that, and so would PG&E. And you can contact us. We've got the emails here. And again, you'll get this deck in an email, so you'll be able to access these. You don't have to scribble those names down for me, for Carmen, and for Mary Lucas McDonald. So a big thank you to PG&E for supporting this workshop series. I want to thank Aaron Fellabaum and Joe Cavallero for being our expert panelists. Also want to thank Mary Lucas McDonald from PG&E and Patsy Duggar for being our utilities experts. And on behalf of Carmen Azzaretti and myself, thank you all for coming today to this workshop.